The bell above Murphy's diner chimed as Sarah Chen pushed through the glass door, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder. The lunch crowd barely looked up from their plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. In the small town of Oak Ridge, Montana, strangers were noticed but not always welcomed. Sarah chose a corner booth near the window, the kind of seat that offered a clear view of all exits. Old habits died hard. At 34, she carried herself with a quietness that some mistook for weakness. She was small-framed, just 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were ordinary jeans, a plain jacket, running shoes that had seen better days. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Dolly with tired eyes and a kind smile, brought over a laminated menu. "Just passing through, honey." "Looking for work, actually," Sarah said softly. "Know of any places hearing?" Dolly's expression shifted to something between pity and doubt. "Well, there's the lumber mill, but that's hard work. Real physical labor. Maybe you could try the grocery store. They might need cashiers." Sarah simply nodded. She'd heard variations of this her entire life. Too small, too quiet, too fragile-looking. What Dolly couldn't know was that Sarah Chen had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the brutal training program. She'd served in places whose names she couldn't speak aloud, done things that still woke her at 3 in the morning. 6 months ago, an injury during her final deployment, a bullet that grazed her shoulder and shattered part of her collarbone, had ended her career. The physical wound had healed. The other wounds were taking longer. She'd chosen Oak Ridge randomly, pointing to a map while sitting in a veterans' hospital in San Diego. Small, quiet, far from the ocean that reminded her of everything she'd lost, her team, her purpose, her identity. As Sarah ate her lunch, she noticed 3 men at the counter. They wore matching jackets with Oak Ridge security embroidered on the back. The largest of the 3, a man with a thick neck and a voice to match, kept glancing her way. "Hey, Dolly," he called out, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "When'd you start letting homeless people eat here?" The diner went quiet. Sarah continued cutting her meatloaf, her expression unchanged. Dolly's face flushed. "That's enough, Rick Chambers. She's a paying customer." Rick swiveled on his stool, looking Sarah up and down with obvious disdain. "No offense, lady, but you look like you've been sleeping in that backpack. This is a respectable town. We don't need drifters." Sarah met his eyes calmly. "I'm looking for work and a place to stay, that's all." "Work?" Rick laughed, and his 2 companions joined in. "Doing what? You look like a strong wind could knock you over." One of the other men, younger with a patchy beard, chimed in. "Rick here runs the best security company in 3 counties. We handle everything: events, bodyguard work, private protection. It takes real strength, real training." "I'm trained," Sarah said simply. This brought another round of laughter. Rick stood up, and Sarah noted his movements, cocky, used to intimidating people with his size. He was maybe 6'2", 230 pounds. All of it useful for bullying, none of it useful for actual combat. "Trained?" Rick walked over to her booth. "Let me guess, you took a self-defense class at the YMCA, watched some YouTube videos." Sarah took a sip of her water. Every instinct screamed at her to put Rick on the floor in about 3 seconds. Instead, she said, something like that. "Look, sweetheart," Rick leaned against her table, invading her space. "I'll give you some free advice. This town doesn't need whatever you're selling. The lumber mill won't hire you. Nobody will. Save yourself some trouble and move along." Dolly stepped forward. "Rick, I said that's enough." But Rick ignored her, pulling a 20 from his wallet and tossing it on Sarah's table. "Here, buy yourself a bus ticket to somewhere else. Consider it charity." Sarah looked at the $20 bill, then back at Rick. For just a moment, something flashed in her eyes, something that would have made her former commanding officer proud and her enemies terrified. But it passed quickly. "Keep your money," she said quietly. "I don't need charity, I just need a chance to work." Rick shook his head, laughing as he returned to his seat. "A chance to work. That's rich. Come on, boys, let's get back to the real world where people know their limitations." As the three men left, their laughter echoed through the diner. The other customers slowly returned to their meals, but Sarah felt their sideways glances. The stranger who'd been put in her place. Dolly approached with a coffee pot, refilling Sarah's cup without asking. "Don't mind Rick, he's all talk." "Is he?" Sarah asked. "Mostly," Dolly hesitated. "Though his security company does run this town, more or less. Mayor's office uses them. So does the bank, the lumber mill, even the school for events. Rick likes people knowing he's important." Sarah nodded slowly, filing away the information. In her old life, she would have called Rick a local power player, someone who controlled a small territory through connections and intimidation. Not dangerous globally, but potentially very dangerous locally. "There's a boarding house 2 blocks east," Dolly said, her voice kind. "Mrs. Patterson runs it. Tell her I sent you. She might have a room." "Thank you," Sarah said. "And honey," Dolly glanced toward the door where Rick had exited, "I don't know what kind of training you have, but in this town, it might be better to keep it to yourself. Some men don't like being shown up." Sarah managed a small smile. "I'll keep that in mind." As she finished her meal, Sarah stared out the window at Oak Ridge's Main Street. She'd come here looking for peace, for anonymity, for a chance to figure out who she was without the uniform. Instead, she'd found a town with a bully problem. And despite her best intentions to leave that life behind, Sarah Chen was very good at solving certain types of problems. Part 2, taking root. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a 3-story Victorian with peeling yellow paint and a porch that creaked with character. The elderly landlady, a wisp of a woman with snow-white hair and sharp blue eyes, sized up Sarah in about 10 seconds. "Dolly called ahead," Mrs. Patterson said, holding open the screen door. "Said you were good people even if you don't look like much." Sarah almost smiled. "That seems to be the consensus." "How long you planning to stay?" "I don't know yet." Mrs. Patterson quoted a weekly rate that was surprisingly fair. The room was small but clean, a single bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the backyard. Sarah took it immediately, paying for 2 weeks up front with cash from the envelope that held her savings. "Breakfast is at 7, dinner's at 6, Mrs. Patterson said. "No drinking, no drugs, no overnight guests. You seem the quiet type, so I doubt you'll be trouble." "No trouble," Sarah agreed. That first week, Sarah learned the rhythm of Oak Ridge. Population 4,200 according to the sign at the town limits. One main street with the essentials: diner, hardware store, grocery, post office, 3 churches, and 2 bars. The lumber mill sat on the north edge of town, employing about 300 people. Most families had lived here for generations. She applied at the lumber mill first. The foreman, a gruff man named Ed Kowalski, looked at her application and shook his head before she even finished filling it out. "Can't use you," he said bluntly. "The work's too hard." "I'm stronger than I look." "I'm sure you are, but insurance won't cover it. Someone your size gets hurt, it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Try the grocery store." The grocery store manager, a nervous man named Phil, was more apologetic but equally unhelpful. "We're not hearing right now. Maybe in a few months." Sarah soon realized that Rick Chambers' influence ran deeper than she'd thought. At the hardware store, the owner mentioned that Oak Ridge Security had recommended against hearing transients. At the gas station, the manager said they needed someone with more physical presence for security reasons. By Friday, Sarah had been rejected by every business in town. She sat on Mrs. Patterson's porch that evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, when a sheriff's deputy pulled up to the curb. He was older, maybe 55, with gray in his hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble. "Sarah Chen," he called out. "That's me." He climbed the porch steps slowly, one hand resting casually near his belt, not threatening, just aware. "I'm Deputy Frank Martinez. Mind if we talk?" "Is something wrong?" Frank settled into the porch swing. "That's what I'm here to find out. You've been in town a week, applied for work all over. People are curious about you." "I'm just looking for a job." "That's what I hear. I also hear you had a run-in with Rick Chambers at Murphy's Diner." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "He made some comments. I ignored them." Frank studied her carefully. "You're military, aren't you?" Sarah met his eyes. There was no point denying it. A cop with experience could always spot a veteran. Something about the bearing, the awareness, the way they held themselves. "I was Navy. Medical discharge 6 months ago." "Navy?" Frank repeated. "What you do in the Navy?" "Little bit of everything." Frank smiled slightly. That's the kind of answer that usually means something specific. "Look, Ms. Chen, I'm not trying to give you a hard time. In fact, I ran your name through the system. Clean record, not even a parking ticket. Whatever you did in the Navy, you've got security clearances I can't even read." Sarah said nothing. "Here's my concern," Frank continued. "Oak Ridge is a good town with good people, but we've got some problems. Rick Chambers being one of them. His security company operates in a gray area. Lots of cash business, minimal oversight, and Rick likes to throw his weight around. I don't have proof of anything illegal, but my gut tells me something's not right." "What does that have to do with me?" "Honestly, I'm not sure yet. But the first thing Rick did after meeting you was start calling his connections, making sure you couldn't find work. That tells me he felt threatened by you somehow. And Rick doesn't feel threatened easily." Sarah considered her response carefully. "I'm not looking for trouble, Deputy. I just want to work and be left alone." "I believe you, but trouble has a way of finding certain people." Frank stood up, pulling a business card from his pocket. "If you need anything, if Rick or his boys hassle you, you call me directly. Oak Ridge might be a small town, but we've still got laws." After Frank left, Sarah sat in the growing darkness. She'd served her country for 12 years, sacrificed her body and her peace of mind, and now she couldn't even get hired to stock shelves in a grocery store. All because some small-time bully decided she didn't belong. The anger she'd been suppressing began to simmer. The next morning, Sarah went for a run, 5 miles through town and into the foothills. Her shoulder ached at first, but the pain faded as her body remembered its conditioning. She passed the lumber mill, the grocery store, all the places that had rejected her. On her way back, she noticed a small storefront with a "for lease" sign in the window. An idea began to form. That afternoon, she walked into the town hall and asked about business licenses. The clerk, a young woman named Amy, was helpful and friendly, explaining the process for opening a small business in Oak Ridge. "What kind of business?" Amy asked. "Training," Sarah said. "Self-defense and fitness classes, maybe some security consulting." Amy's eyes widened. "Oh, well, that's interesting. You know Rick Chambers." "I know about Rick Chambers," Sarah said calmly. "I'm going to open my business anyway." By Monday, Sarah had filed her paperwork, paid her fees, and signed a 6-month lease on the storefront. She withdrew a significant portion of her savings to cover startup costs. Mrs. Patterson, who seemed to have adopted Sarah as a project, helped spread the word. "That girl who Rick tried to run out of town," Dolly told her regular customers at the diner. "She's opening a self-defense studio. Good for her." The response surprised everyone, especially Rick. Within 3 days, Sarah had 10 people signed up for her first class, mostly women, but a few men too. They'd all heard the story of the quiet stranger who'd been rejected everywhere, but refused to give up. In a town where Rick Chambers controlled too much, there was something appealing about someone willing to stand up to him. Sarah's first class was on a Wednesday evening. She'd equipped the studio with basic mats, a few training dummies, and nothing fancy. Her students ranged from a 16-year-old high school girl to a 62-year-old grandmother. "I'm not going to teach you how to win a fight," Sarah began, her voice calm but carrying authority. "I'm going to teach you how to survive one. There's a difference." For the next hour, she demonstrated basic techniques: how to break a grab, where to strike to disable an attacker, how to use your voice as a weapon. She moved with an efficiency that made complex movements look simple. Every instruction was clear, every demonstration precise. At the end of class, the 16-year-old, a girl named Emma with bruises on her arms that she tried to hide, approached Sarah quietly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you really in the military?" Sarah nodded. 12 years. "Did you ever, were you ever really afraid?" Sarah looked at this girl, seeing something of herself at that age, trying to be brave, trying to be strong, but not knowing how. "Every single day. But I learned that fear is just information. It tells you what matters. What you do with that information, that's what defines you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "My boyfriend, he gets angry sometimes. I thought maybe if I was stronger." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in her chest. "Come back tomorrow during the day. We'll talk. And Emma, it's not about being stronger. It's about knowing you deserve better." After everyone left, Sarah locked up the studio and walked back to the boarding house. She'd taken the first step. She had a business, students, a purpose again. What she didn't know was that Rick Chambers had been parked across the street the entire evening, watching through the studio window with growing anger. The war hadn't started yet. The brake line had been cut cleanly, too cleanly to be an accident. Sarah discovered it Thursday morning when she knelt down to check why her old Honda felt wrong when she'd started it. Years of training made her cautious about things that felt off, and the spongy brake pedal had triggered every alarm in her head. She didn't call the police right away. Instead, she walked to Murphy's Diner, where Deputy Frank Martinez usually had his morning coffee. "Someone tried to kill me," she said quietly, sliding into the booth across from him. Frank's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "Explain." Sarah told him about the brake line. Frank followed her back to the boarding house, examined the car himself, and called in a tow truck. His expression was grim. "This is attempted murder," he said. "I'm opening an investigation." "It was Rick Chambers." "Probably, but probably isn't proof." Frank sighed heavily. "Sarah, I need to ask you something. What exactly did you do in the Navy?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I was a SEAL, Special Operations, classified deployments." Frank absorbed this information slowly, his understanding of the situation shifting. "A Navy SEAL, Jesus. No wonder Rick's scared of you." "I'm not here to fight anyone. I just want to live my life." "I know that, but Rick doesn't see it that way. He sees you as a threat to his control." Frank pulled out his notebook. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm documenting everything. I'm going to have deputies drive by your studio and the boarding house regularly. But Sarah, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If Rick or his people come after you again, you call me first. You don't handle it yourself. I know what you're capable of, or at least I can imagine. But if you hurt someone, even in self-defense, the law gets complicated, especially when you're military trained." Sarah nodded, but they both knew the promise was complicated. Her training didn't turn off just because she'd left the service. That evening, Emma showed up at the studio an hour before class. Sarah had been expecting her. They sat on the mats and Emma talked about her boyfriend Derek, about how he'd changed over the past 6 months, about how the anger had started small but kept growing. "He's never hit me," Emma said quickly. "Not really. Just grabbed my arm sometimes, pushed me once. He says he's sorry after." Sarah had heard variations of this story too many times. "Emma, I'm going to tell you something important. You listening?" Emma nodded. "It doesn't get better, it only gets worse. Men like Derek, they test boundaries. First it's grabbing, then pushing, then hitting. They apologize because they know they crossed a line, but they're really just checking to see if you'll stay. And when you stay, they learn they can go further. Tears streamed down Emma's face. But he loves me. No, he doesn't. Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't scare you. Love doesn't make you hide bruises. I don't know where I'd go. My mom works 2 jobs. We barely afford rent. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if you could stay here? I've got a back office with a couch. Not permanent, but until you figure things out. I couldn't. Yes, you could, and you should, tonight if possible. Emma looked up at Sarah with a mixture of hope and terror. He'll be so angry. Let him be angry. His anger is not your responsibility. After class that night, Emma brought a backpack with her essentials. Sarah set her up in the back office, gave her a key to the studio, and made sure Emma understood she was safe here. What Sarah didn't anticipate was that Derek would find out by Friday morning. He showed up at the studio at noon, pounding on the glass door. Sarah opened it calmly, stepping outside so Emma wouldn't have to see him. Derek was 20 years old, tall and athletic, with the kind of looks that probably made things easy for him. Right now, those looks were twisted with rage. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Who?" "Don't play games with me. Emma, I know she's here." Even if she were, that would be her choice. Derek stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "You need to mind your own business, lady. Emma's my girlfriend. What we do is between us. She's safe, that's all you need to know." "Safe?" Derek's laugh was ugly. "From what? I've never hurt her. She's being dramatic and you're filling her head with crazy ideas." Sarah's voice remained calm, but her stance shifted slightly, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides. Anyone with real training would have recognized a fighter's posture. Derek didn't. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said. "You're going to leave. Emma will contact you when and if she wants to. You're not going to call her, text her, or come by here again. Clear? And if I don't, then we'll have a problem." Derek laughed again, but there was uncertainty behind it. Something about this small woman made him nervous, though he couldn't articulate why. "You threatening me?" "No, I'm explaining consequences." "Whatever." Derek backed toward his truck. "Tell Emma she's making a big mistake. Tell her I won't be this nice when she comes crawling back." After he left, Sarah found Emma crying in the back office. "I heard everything. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for bringing trouble to you." "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble was already here. You just exposed it." But Sarah knew Derek was only the beginning. In a town this small, word traveled fast. By evening, everyone would know that the new self-defense teacher was harboring Derek's girlfriend, and Derek's uncle was Rick Chambers. The call came at 8 o'clock that night. Sarah was at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, heating up leftovers in the kitchen, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Ms. Chen, this is Rick Chambers." His voice was smooth, controlled. "I think we need to talk." "About what?" "My nephew came to see you today. I understand there was some confusion about his girlfriend." "No confusion. Emma chose to stay somewhere safe." "Safe? Derek's a good kid. He'd never hurt anyone." Sarah almost laughed. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Rick's voice hardened. "Look, I tried to be nice when you first came to town, tried to give you advice about moving on. You didn't listen. Now you're causing problems, opening a business that competes with mine, poisoning a young girl's mind against her boyfriend. I don't like problems." "Then stay away from me." "This is my town, Miss Chen. I don't stay away from anything. So let me make something clear. You're going to tell Emma to go home. You're going to close your little studio. And you're going to leave Oak Ridge within the week. Do that and we don't have any issues. And if I don't, then I can't guarantee your safety. Oak Ridge can be dangerous for people who don't know their place." The line went dead. Sarah sat in the quiet kitchen, her leftovers forgotten. This was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. Rick had already tried to cut her brake lines. Now he was making open threats. The smart move would be to call Deputy Martinez, document everything, let the law handle it. But Sarah had learned in 12 years of service that the law couldn't always protect you, especially not in small towns where corruption ran deep. Sometimes you had to protect yourself. She thought about Emma, sleeping in the studio, finally feeling safe for the first time in months. She thought about her other students, women who'd never been taught that they had the right to take up space, to fight back, to refuse victimhood. She thought about Rick Chambers and men like him, who built their power on intimidation and violence, who crushed anyone who challenged them. Sarah Chen had spent 12 years fighting enemies of her country. She'd been prepared to die for people she'd never met, in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. Was she really going to run from a bully in Montana? The answer came quickly, rising from the same place that had driven her to become a SEAL in the first place. No. She called Deputy Martinez and told him about Rick's threats. Frank promised to increase patrols and talk to Rick about harassment, but they both knew talk wouldn't solve this. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window watching the street, old instincts on full alert. At 2 in the morning she saw a truck drive slowly past the boarding house. Rick's truck, she was certain. Just a message, "I know where you live." Saturday morning, Sarah opened the studio early. Emma was already awake, looking exhausted but determined. "I don't want to cause you problems," Emma said. "You're not. This isn't about you. It's about Rick Chambers thinking he owns this town. He kind of does, though. My mom says his family's been powerful here for 30 years. Nobody stands up to them. Then it's time someone did." At 10 o'clock, Sarah's morning class began. 15 students now, word having spread. She taught them pressure points, escape techniques, how to use common objects as weapons. More than techniques, though, she taught them confidence. "Size doesn't matter," she explained, demonstrating on a 6-foot male volunteer. "Physics matters. Leverage matters. Knowing where someone's weak points are, that matters. Every person in this room can defend themselves against someone bigger and stronger. You just have to believe it." After class, an older woman named Margaret approached Sarah. "I heard Rick Chambers threatened you." "Word travels fast." "In this town, always," Margaret hesitated. "My daughter was 17 when Rick assaulted her at a party, 15 years ago. She was too scared to press charges. His family made it clear what would happen if she did. She left town and never came back." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "Did you report it?" "To who?" "Rick's father was the mayor. His cousin was a deputy. The whole system protected him." Margaret's eyes were fierce despite her age. "But things are different now. Frank Martinez is a good cop. And you're not afraid of Rick." "No, I'm not." "Good, because this town needs someone who isn't." That afternoon, more stories emerged. A business owner who'd refused to hire Oak Ridge security and suddenly faced endless inspections and permit problems. A woman who'd rejected Rick's advances and found herself fired from her job. A teenager who'd stood up to Derek and ended up with a broken nose that everyone pretended was an accident. Pattern and practice. That's what the military called it, a documented history of abuse and intimidation. Sarah spent Saturday evening compiling everything, writing it down, building a case. She'd give it all to Deputy Martinez, let the law work. But Sunday morning brought a new development. Emma's mother showed up at the studio, brought by Rick Chambers himself. The woman was crying, pleading with Emma to come home. Rick stood behind her, his expression sympathetic and concerned, a performance. "Emma, honey, you're breaking your mother's heart," Rick said. "Derek's sorry, he just wants to talk. And Ms. Chen here. Well, she means well, but she doesn't understand how things work in families." Sarah stepped between Rick and Emma. "Emma's an adult. She makes her own choices." Rick's mask slipped for just a second, his eyes going cold. Then the concerned expression returned. Of course she does. We're not trying to force anyone. We're just asking her to think about her family. Emma looked at her mother's tears, at Rick's fake concern, at Sarah's steady presence. Sarah could see the moment of choice. The girl Emma had been, programmed to please and submit, warring with the woman she was becoming. "I'm not going back," Emma said, her voice shaking but firm. "Not to Derek, not to being scared all the time." Her mother sobbed. Rick's expression hardened. "This is your last chance," Rick said to Sarah, no longer bothering with the act. "Walk away now or you'll regret it." "I don't think so." Rick turned and left, Emma's mother following. But his parting glance promised that this was far from over. That night someone threw a brick through the studio's window, spray-painted on the brick, "Last warning." Sarah stood in the broken glass looking at the message. Deputy Martinez came, took photos, filed a report, but they both knew this was just the beginning. "I can't protect you 24 hours a day," Frank said quietly. "I know. If this goes where I think it's going, then I'll handle it." Frank looked at her, really looked at her. "Try not to kill anyone, okay? The paperwork's a nightmare." Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. "I'll do my best." After Frank left, Sarah cleaned up the glass and boarded up the window. Emma helped, neither of them speaking much. Finally, Emma asked the question. "Are you scared?" Sarah thought about her answer carefully. "I'm prepared. There's a difference." "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." The attack came on Monday night. Sarah had been expecting it. Rick Chambers wasn't subtle, and his escalation pattern was predictable. What she hadn't anticipated was that he'd be smart enough to make it look like her fault. The call came at 9:30. A distressed woman's voice. "Please help. There's a man trying to break into my house on Maple Street. My husband's out of town. I'm alone with my kids. Please, I heard you teach self-defense. I don't know who else to call." Sarah should have questioned it, should have insisted the woman call 911. But 12 years of service had hardwired her to respond to people in danger, and the terror in the woman's voice sounded genuine. "I'm calling the police," Sarah said. "Stay on the line." "No, please just come. He'll be gone by the time police arrive, please." It was a mistake. Sarah knew it even as she grabbed her keys and ran out the door, but sometimes instinct overrode judgment. Maple Street was only 6 blocks away. Sarah ran, her body falling into the rhythm of movement she'd maintained even during her medical recovery. The address was a small house with the porch light on. Sarah approached cautiously, every sense alert. The door was ajar. "Hello," Sarah called out. "I'm here to help." She pushed the door open wider, stepping into the living room, and immediately knew she'd been set up. The house was empty. No furniture, no family pictures, no sign anyone lived here, just an empty shell. Sarah spun around to leave, but 3 men were already blocking the doorway. She recognized them instantly. Rick Chambers and his 2 security employees from the diner that first day. "You know what's funny?" Rick said, his voice casual. "The owner of this house lives in Florida, been trying to sell it for months. No alarm system, no cameras, real private." Sarah's mind calculated exits and odds, 3 on 1, all of them bigger. Rick probably armed, though she couldn't see a weapon yet. The back door would be her best option, but Rick was already moving to cut off that angle. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "I want you to understand something," Rick said, moving closer. "I run this town, not the mayor, not the sheriff, me. When I tell someone to leave, they leave. When I say jump, people ask how high. You didn't listen. You embarrassed me, made me look weak. So you're here to what? Teach me a lesson." Something like that. Rick nodded to his 2 employees. "Boys, make sure she understands." The younger one with the patchy beard moved first. It was his mistake. Sarah had spent 12 years training for combat against enemies who wanted to kill her. These men wanted to hurt and intimidate her, which meant they'd be slower, less committed. The bearded man reached for her arm, probably planning to grab and intimidate. Sarah's reaction was automatic. She sidestepped, grabbed his extended arm, and used his momentum to throw him into the wall. The impact was hard enough to stun him. Before the second man could react, Sarah drove her palm into his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs, then swept his legs. Both men were on the ground in less than 3 seconds. Rick's expression shifted from confident to concerned. His hand moved toward his jacket gun. Sarah's mind registered automatically. "Don't," Sarah said, her voice carrying a command authority that came from years of leading troops in combat zones. Rick froze, his hand on the gun but not yet drawing it. For the first time, he seemed to understand what he was facing. "You want to pull that weapon," Sarah said quietly. "We both know how this ends. You're not trained, your draw is slow. I'm 8 feet away. I can close that distance in less time than it takes you to clear your holster." "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining tactical realities. You set me up, lured me here to assault me. Those men on the ground will testify to that, won't they?" Sarah looked at the 2 groaning men. "Or maybe they won't want to admit they got dropped by someone half their size." Rick's face flushed with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. Here's what happens next. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave my students alone. You're going to back off, and I'm going to pretend this never happened." "And if I don't?" Sarah's expression was stone. "Then I stop being nice." "Nice? You just assaulted my employees." "Self-defense. They moved on me first. You brought me here under false pretenses. I have the phone call recorded, by the way. Always keep my phone on record when things feel wrong. Old habit." Rick's confidence was crumbling, but his anger remained. "You think you're smart. You think you've won. I've got lawyers. I've got connections. I'll bury you." "Try it." Sarah moved toward the door, forcing Rick to step aside. "But Rick, next time you come after me, make sure you win, because I don't give third chances." Sarah walked out of the house, every nerve screaming to run but her body maintaining a calm, controlled pace. She didn't look back. She made it 2 blocks before her hands started shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline dump, from the realization of how close that had come to turning lethal. If Rick had drawn that gun, she would have had to disarm him. Someone might have died. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Deputy Martinez. "Frank, I need to report an assault. Rick Chambers and his men just tried to jump me." 20 minutes later, Frank arrived at the boarding house where Sarah was waiting. She told him everything, showed him the recording of the fake phone call, described the scene. "Are you hurt?" Frank asked. "No, but 2 of Rick's guys might need ice packs." Frank almost smiled. "You took them both down." "It wasn't hard. They were expecting a victim, not a fight." "Jesus." Frank ran his hand through his hair. "Okay, here's the problem. You're right. This is attempted assault, possibly kidnapping. I can bring Rick in for questioning, but you also just assaulted 2 men. In self-defense. They moved first. I have witnesses." "Well, Rick and his men are witnesses and they won't want to admit what happened." "Exactly, which means this becomes a he-said-she-said situation, in a town where Rick has influence." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, you need to leave Oak Ridge, tonight, before this gets worse." "No." "Damn it, don't be stubborn. Rick's going to escalate. Next time he won't make the mistake of coming himself. He'll send people who actually know how to fight, or he'll use that gun. Is this town really worth dying for?" Sarah thought about Emma, sleeping safely in the studio. About Margaret and her daughter who'd been forced to leave. About all the women in her classes learning that they didn't have to accept being victims. "It's not about the town," Sarah said. "It's about not letting bullies win." "That's noble and stupid," Frank sighed heavily. Fine, I'll do what I can officially, but Sarah, I think it's time to consider unofficial options. What do you mean? Frank pulled out his phone and showed her a number. This is a friend of mine, FBI White Collar Crime Division. Rick's been running his security company for 10 years. Lots of cash transactions, minimal documentation. My friend's been interested in investigating for a while, but we've never had leverage. And now you do. Maybe, if someone were to provide detailed documentation of Rick's business practices, his intimidation tactics, pattern of behavior, that might be enough for a warrant. Financial crimes are tricky, but the FBI loves taking down local corruption. Sarah looked at the number. That could take months. Probably, which means you need to survive that long, can you? I don't have much choice. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the scene in the empty house, kept calculating what would have happened if Rick had drawn his gun. In combat, the enemy was clear. Here, the rules were murky, complicated by laws and jurisdictions and the fact that Rick, for all his criminality, hadn't technically done anything that would put him away for years. Tuesday morning, Sarah opened the studio to find 20 people waiting for class, double her usual attendance. Word had spread about what happened, though details were garbled. Some people thought Rick had attacked Sarah with a knife. Others heard she'd hospitalized his entire security team. The truth was more mundane but somehow more powerful. A small woman had defended herself against 3 larger men and walked away unharmed. "Is it true?" one of her students asked. "Did you really take down Rick's guys?" "I protected myself," Sarah said simply. "That's what I'm teaching you to do." The class that morning was intense. Sarah taught them about awareness, about recognizing danger before it escalated, about the legal implications of self-defense. She taught them to yell, to make noise, to never go quietly. After class, Emma pulled Sarah aside. "Derek called me. He said Rick's planning something bigger. He sounded scared, like he was warning me." "What did he say exactly?" "That Rick's bringing in people from out of town, professional people. Derek said I should convince you to leave before they get here." Sarah absorbed this information. Professional people. That meant Rick was hearing actual muscle, not just his incompetent employees. That changed the equation significantly. "When?" Sarah asked. "This weekend. Derek said they're coming Saturday night." "Okay, thank you for telling me." Emma looked terrified. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure nobody gets hurt." That afternoon, Sarah called the FBI number Deputy Martinez had given her. She spent 2 hours on the phone with an agent named Victoria Pierce, detailing everything she knew about Rick's operation. Agent Pierce was interested but cautious. "What you're describing sounds like racketeering," Pierce said. "But building a case takes time. Months, maybe longer. Can you provide documentation?" "I can try. How long do I have?" "What do you mean?" Sarah explained about the professional people coming Saturday night. Pierce was quiet for a long moment. "Ms. Chen, if what you're telling me is true, you're in serious danger. Rick Chambers is essentially hiring contract criminals to assault or possibly kill you. That's not something you can handle alone." "I know." "Then you need to leave, right now. We can put you in witness protection if necessary." "I'm not leaving." "Then I can't help you. Not officially. The FBI doesn't have agents available to provide personal protection for every witness who refuses to leave a dangerous situation." "I understand." "But off the record," Pierce's voice softened. "I looked up your service record. Most of it's classified, but I got the basics. You're a Navy SEAL. You've survived situations that would kill most people. So I'm going to give you some advice. Don't fight fair. Don't try to be noble. If Rick sends professionals after you, treat them like enemy combatants. Do what you have to do to survive, and we'll sort out the legalities afterward." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her studio thinking. Saturday night, 4 days away. She could leave, should leave. Pack up Emma, close the studio, disappear. She had skills that would let her survive anywhere. But she'd spent 12 years of her life defending people who couldn't defend themselves. She'd lost friends, sacrificed her body, given up any chance at a normal life, all in service of protecting the helpless. Was she really going to run now? The answer was still no. Wednesday and Thursday passed in tense preparation. Sarah moved Emma to stay with Mrs. Patterson, who seemed to understand that something dangerous was coming. She documented everything she knew about Rick's operation and sent it to Agent Pierce. She trained harder, making sure her body remembered every lesson from 12 years of combat. Deputy Martinez stopped by Thursday evening. I got a tip that Rick's hired 2 guys out of Billings. Ex-cons, assault charges, the works. Sarah, this is serious. I know. I can't protect you. I've got 2 deputies total, and Rick will make sure we're busy elsewhere Saturday night. You'll be alone. I've been alone before. Frank looked at her with something between admiration and exasperation. You know what you're doing. Yes. You know the law is going to ask questions afterward. I'll have answers. Good. Frank pulled out his service weapon and set it on her desk. Accidentally left this here. Won't notice it's missing until Monday. Sarah looked at the gun. She'd qualified expert marksman in the Navy, but guns made things complicated. Lethal force had different rules in civilian life. I can't take that, she said. Yes, you can, because I'd rather face an inquiry about a missing weapon than attend your funeral. After Frank left, Sarah stared at the gun for a long time. Then she locked it in her desk drawer. She'd use it if she had to, but only if she had to. Friday night, Sarah slept fitfully, her dreams filled with memories of firefights in distant deserts, of teammates lost, of the moment the bullet had ended her career. She woke at dawn Saturday morning with absolute clarity. Today, one way or another, this ended. Part 5, Final Stand. Saturday began ordinarily enough. Sarah opened the studio for her morning class, taught 15 students the fundamentals of situational awareness, and pretended everything was normal. But her students sensed something different about her today, a focus, an intensity that went beyond teaching. After class, Margaret approached her. It's today, isn't it? What makes you say that? I recognize that look. My late husband had it before deployment, like you're already preparing for battle. Sarah didn't confirm or deny. If something happens to me, there's an envelope in my desk drawer, top right. It has everything about Rick's operation, financial records, witness statements, everything. Give it to Deputy Martinez or the FBI. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Don't talk like that. I'm being practical, that's all. The day passed slowly. Sarah cleaned the studio, organized her paperwork, made sure everything was in order. At 5 o'clock, she sent Emma a text. Stay with Mrs. Patterson tonight. Don't come to the studio no matter what you hear. Emma's response came immediately. Please be careful. At 7 o'clock, Deputy Martinez called. Oak Ridge Security just reported a possible break-in at the lumber mill. I've got to respond. Both my deputies are already handling a domestic disturbance on the other side of town. Classic misdirection. I know. You going to be okay? Ask me tomorrow. At 8 o'clock, Sarah locked the studio's front door and turned off most of the lights, leaving only the back office illuminated. She'd chosen her ground carefully. The studio gave her advantages. Open space, equipment she could use as weapons, multiple exits, and most importantly, security cameras she'd installed Wednesday that were uploading to cloud storage in real time. Whatever happened tonight would be documented. At 9:15, she heard them arrive. 2 vehicles, a truck and a sedan, doors closing quietly, footsteps approaching from different directions. They were trying to be stealthy, but Sarah had spent years detecting enemy movement in urban environments. These men were amateurs compared to Taliban fighters. The back door handle rattled. Someone was picking the lock, competent but not expert. Sarah estimated 30 seconds before they gained entry. She positioned herself in the center of the training area, standing under the only light, making herself visible. Let them think she was unaware. Let them underestimate her one more time. The lock clicked open. Two men entered through the back door, while footsteps at the front indicated at least one more trying that entrance. The two men were exactly what she'd expected, ex-cons hired for their willingness to commit violence, not their skill. Both were large, both moved with the confidence of people who'd intimidated their way through life. "You Sarah Chen?" the first one asked. He had a scar running down his cheek and dead eyes. "That's me. Rick Chambers sent us, said to deliver a message." "What message would that be?" Scar smiled, showing missing teeth. "That you should have left when he asked nice." The second man, bulkier and slower, added, "We're supposed to make sure you can't run your little studio anymore. Rick said break both your hands, maybe your legs too." Sarah's expression didn't change. "That's not going to happen." They laughed, the kind of laugh that came from having hurt weaker people without consequences. Scar pulled out a collapsible baton, extending it with a sharp click. "We can do this easy or hard, lady. Your choice." The front door crashed open. A third man, smaller but carrying himself like someone who actually knew how to fight. Rick had sent in his B-team first, keeping the professional for backup. "You're surrounded," Scar said. "Nowhere to run." Sarah took a slow breath, feeling her body shift into the state she'd learned in training, hyper-aware, time seeming to slow, every possible move calculating automatically. This was the space where she'd survived countless firefights, where training and instinct merged into something beyond thought. "I'm not running," she said quietly. Scar moved first, swinging the baton at her head. Sarah ducked under it, stepped inside his reach and drove her elbow into his throat. Not hard enough to kill, she was still operating under civilian rules, but hard enough to collapse his trachea partially. He went down gasping. The bulky one charged, trying to tackle her. Sarah sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and used his momentum to throw him into the training dummy. The impact stunned him. The professional from the front door didn't rush in. He circled, evaluating, recognizing that Sarah wasn't what he'd expected. "You've got training," he said. "Military." "Navy." "I was Army, Rangers. This doesn't have to go bad." "You broke into my business to assault me. It's already bad." "Rick's paying me $5,000 to put you in the hospital. That's not personal, it's business." "Then you should have negotiated a higher price." They engaged then, not the sloppy brawling of amateurs, but two professionals testing each other. He threw a jab combination that Sarah blocked, following with a low kick she barely avoided. She countered with a palm strike he deflected. They broke apart, circling. "You're good," he admitted, "but I've got 50 pounds on you and reach advantage. Weight doesn't matter if you can't catch me." They exchanged more techniques, him pressing his size advantage, her using speed and precision. Sarah took a glancing hit to her shoulder that reminded her of her injury. He landed a kick to her thigh that would leave a massive bruise. But Sarah had advantages he didn't recognize. She'd trained with the best special operations fighters in the world. She'd survived combat where mistakes meant death. And most importantly, she was defending her home ground while he was just doing a job. The fight lasted maybe 3 minutes, an eternity in combat time. Sarah finally found her opening when he overextended on a punch. She trapped his arm, stepped behind him, and applied a rear naked choke. Not to kill, just to render unconscious. He struggled for 10 seconds, then went limp. Sarah held it for 5 more seconds to be sure, then released him gently to the floor. She turned to check the other two. Scar was still gasping, struggling to breathe. The bulky one was trying to get up, blood streaming from his nose. "Stay down," Sarah commanded. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd given orders in combat. They stayed down. Sarah pulled out her phone and called 911. "This is Sarah Chen at Chen Defense Studio. 3 men just broke into my business and attempted to assault me. They're subdued. I need police and ambulances." Then she called Deputy Martinez. "It's done. Get here when you can." While waiting for police, Sarah kept her phone camera recording, documenting the scene. Scar was recovering his breathing but couldn't speak. The bulky one was conscious but not moving. The professional was still unconscious but breathing normally. Sarah checked his pockets and found a phone. She scrolled through recent messages, all from a number she recognized as Rick's. Explicit instructions: break her hands, make sure she can't work, make it hurt. Screenshots taken, evidence preserved. Deputy Martinez arrived first, followed quickly by 2 ambulances and a state police car. Frank surveyed the scene: 3 large men injured, 1 small woman standing calmly amidst the wreckage. "Jesus, Sarah." "Self-defense, breaking and entering, attempted assault with a deadly weapon. It's all on camera." She pointed to her security system. The state trooper, a stern-looking woman named Officer Reeves, interviewed everyone. The 3 attackers initially tried to claim they'd been invited to the studio, and Sarah had attacked them without provocation. Then Officer Reeves showed them the security footage, clear evidence of them breaking in, threatening Sarah, attacking first. "You want to try again?" Reeves asked them. Scar, his voice raspy from the throat strike, admitted they'd been hired by Rick Chambers. He said she needed to be taught a lesson, said to break her hands so she couldn't work anymore, paid us $5,000 up front, another $5,000 after. "You're admitting to attempted assault and conspiracy." Reeves seemed almost amused. "I'm taking a deal if you're offering one." By midnight, all 3 men were in custody, facing multiple charges. Deputy Martinez had obtained a warrant for Rick Chambers based on the testimony and text message evidence. State police arrested Rick at his home at 1 in the morning. Sarah sat in her studio, drinking coffee with Frank and Officer Reeves, going over her statement for the 3rd time. "You know you're going to be tied up in legal proceedings for months," Reeves said. "Rick's lawyer will fight this hard." "I know. And you know Rick still has friends in this town. Just because he's arrested doesn't mean the danger's over." "I know that too." Reeves studied Sarah carefully. "You could have killed any of those men, the ranger especially. You had him in a choke hold. 1 more minute and he'd be dead." "I know. But you didn't, even though they came to break your bones, even though you'd be justified. Why?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm not trying to be a killer anymore. I did that for 12 years. I came here to be something different." "What's that?" "Someone who protects people without destroying herself in the process." Sunday morning, the whole town knew. Rick Chambers was in custody, charged with conspiracy to commit assault, attempted assault, witness intimidation, and a growing list of financial crimes as the FBI executed warrants on his business. His 3 hired attackers had all taken deals, providing detailed testimony about Rick's instructions and payment. Sarah's studio had 37 people waiting when she opened Sunday afternoon. Some were existing students, but many were new, people who'd heard the story and wanted to learn from the woman who'd taken down 3 attackers single-handedly. Margaret was there, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter called me this morning. She heard what happened. She's coming home to testify about what Rick did to her 15 years ago." Others came forward too. Years of intimidation and abuse, suddenly finding voices because someone had stood up first. By Monday, Agent Pierce had enough evidence to build a RICO case against Rick Chambers. The financial investigation revealed money laundering, tax evasion, and connections to organized crime in 3 states. Rick's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Pierce was going for the maximum charges. Emma moved back to her mother's house but continued training at the studio. Derek tried to contact her once. She blocked his number and filed for a restraining order. Last Sarah heard, Derek had left town. Tuesday morning, a week after the attack, Sarah sat in Murphy's diner having breakfast when Dolly brought over her coffee. "I owe you an apology," Dolly said. "That first day you came in, I suggested you try to find easy work, like you couldn't handle real challenges. You didn't know." "No, but I should have given you a chance before making assumptions. This whole town should have." Sarah sipped her coffee, looking out at Oak Ridge's Main Street. It looked the same as when she'd arrived 2 months ago, but something fundamental had shifted. People walked with their heads higher. The women in her classes carried themselves differently, not with aggression but with confidence. Deputy Martinez slid into the booth across from her. "Morning." "Morning." "Got some news." Rick made a formal confession. His lawyer advised against it, but Rick's ego couldn't handle people thinking you beat him in a fair fight. He admitted to everything: the break line, the setup at the empty house, hearing the guys to attack you. "District attorney says it'll make the trial straightforward." "Good." "Also, the mayor called a town meeting for tonight. They want to thank you officially. Might give you a key to the city or some such nonsense." Sarah almost smiled. "That's not necessary." "Yeah, well, turns out a lot of people are grateful. Rick had this town scared for a long time. You broke that." "I just defended myself." "You did more than that. You showed everyone that bullies can be beat. That size doesn't matter if you have skill and courage. That's a lesson this town needed." After Frank left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. She'd come to Oak Ridge looking for peace, for anonymity, for a chance to be something other than a soldier. Instead, she'd found another battle. But this time, she'd won without losing herself. She'd used her training not to kill, but to protect. She'd stood up to intimidation without becoming the intimidator. She'd found a way to be strong without being cruel. Her phone buzzed. A text from her old commanding officer, someone she hadn't heard from in months. "Heard about what happened in Montana. Proud of you. You're still serving, just in a different way. Stay safe, sailor." Sarah stared at that message for a long time. She'd spent 6 months mourning the loss of her military career, feeling like she'd lost her purpose. But maybe purpose wasn't about the uniform or the mission briefings or the deployments. Maybe purpose was about being in the right place when people needed help, and having the courage and skill to provide it. That evening, Sarah stood before a town meeting in Oak Ridge's community center. 200 people packed the room, more than she'd expected. The mayor, a nervous man who'd apparently been paying Rick's security company for consulting services, gave a speech about community values and standing up to corruption. Then they asked Sarah to speak. She stood at the podium, looking at faces she'd come to know, her students, the shop owners who'd rejected her applications, the people who'd ignored Rick's abuse for years. And she spoke from the heart. "2 months ago, I came to this town looking for a quiet place to disappear. I'd spent 12 years in the Navy and I was tired. I'd seen too much violence, lost too many friends. I wanted peace. Instead, I found Rick Chambers and his intimidation. I found good people too scared to stand up. I found a town that had forgotten how to fight back against bullies. I didn't take down Rick Chambers because I'm some kind of hero. I did it because I didn't know how to do anything else. When someone threatens you, you have two choices: run or stand. I've never been good at running. But here's what I learned in Oak Ridge. It's not about being the toughest or the strongest. It's about refusing to be a victim. It's about knowing that you have value and dignity and nobody gets to take that away from you. Not Rick Chambers, not anyone. Every person in this room has the right to feel safe, to work without intimidation, to live without fear. That's not radical, that's basic human dignity. And if we forget that, if we let bullies convince us we're helpless, then we've already lost. So thank you for this recognition. But the real heroes are the people who came forward to testify against Rick, the women who told their stories after years of silence, Emma, who left an abusive relationship, all of you who decided that enough was enough. You didn't need me to save you. You just needed someone to go first. The applause was thunderous. Sarah accepted the mayor's plaque, a symbolic key to the city, and shook hands with what felt like everyone in Oak Ridge. Margaret hugged her. Dolly cried. Even the lumber mill foreman, Ed Kowalski, approached her. About that job application, he said. We're looking for a safety coordinator. Teach our workers defensive techniques, emergency response, that kind of thing. You interested? Sarah smiled. Yeah, I am. 3 months later, Chen Defense Studio had a waiting list. Sarah employed 2 part-time instructors to handle overflow classes. The FBI's case against Rick Chambers was proceeding to trial, with Rico facing potentially 20 years in federal prison. His security company had been dissolved, assets seized. Emma was in community college, studying to be a counselor specializing in domestic violence. She still trained at the studio 3 times a week. Deputy Martinez had been promoted to sheriff after his work exposing Rick's operation. His first act was hiring 2 new deputies and implementing a community outreach program. And Sarah Chen, the woman who'd been told she was too small, too weak, too helpless, had found her purpose after all. Not as a soldier, but as a teacher. Not fighting wars overseas, but fighting for dignity and safety in a small Montana town. She still woke up at 3 in the morning sometimes, still carried the scars of 12 years in combat. But she'd learned something important. Strength wasn't about how much violence you could inflict. It was about how much you could endure while staying true to your values. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, Sarah unlocked her studio at dawn. The window that had been broken by a brick had been replaced with reinforced glass. The words Chen Defense Studio were painted professionally across the front. As the sun rose over Oak Ridge, Sarah began her morning routine, stretching, forms, meditation. The exercises that had sustained her through war now sustained her through peace. She heard the bell chime as her first student arrived early, a new enrollee, a woman in her 50s who'd finally found the courage to leave an abusive marriage. Am I too old to learn this? The woman asked nervously. Sarah smiled, remembering another morning when she'd walked into Murphy's diner, carrying her worn backpack, looking for a chance. You're never too old to learn. You're stronger than you think, Sarah said. Let's get started. And as the morning light filled the studio, Sarah Chen began teaching another lesson, not just in self-defense, but in the fundamental truth that had guided her entire life.